Let's discuss the following.
We came across a tip that would appear to be an alternate suspect.
And they can't identify it. That's what you call a real burner, folks. That's Slocumb. You can't tell me that his phone went off the radar 6 days earlier. You've never seen his phone pop back up, but all of a sudden now you see a burner phone that they can't track and you don't think it's Slocumb? Come on now. He left in Los Angeles, went straight to Moscow, handled business, and then they met right back up in Ellensburg, right in the middle of Seattle and Spokane, exactly where you would expect them to meet.
What's her name? Titties! Yeah, that's what it is!
That proves who the assailant was at the King Road residence on November 13th, and that is your alternate suspect. You can take that track phone number defense, run it with the 3,800 cell phones that were on the cell tower, and I bet you $1,000 that one will pop up.
And I bet you $1,000 it was not in that tower dump. But let's get started on discussing this because I don't believe Slocumb was there at all in Moscow. And we know Gil wasn't, and they definitely know Cervantes wasn't. So let's look at the documents. Okay, so these are from the federal case against Jesse James Bailey and his group. So this comes from Slocumb's indictment documents and sentencing documents and everything. But this was a timeline of the transportation of drugs. And this is also the timeline that Ombre's trying to say lines up with them supposedly committing the Idaho 4 murders. But you'll see it talks about November 10th through 14th, 2022. Slocumb travels with Cervantes to Arizona in tandem with Gil, who flew to Phoenix to meet with the suspected drug supplier. Cervantes and Slocumb then appear to meet with Gil and return directly to the stash house in Shelton, Washington. Okay, so if we go to this next page, this tells you that on November 10th, the special agent Stephen Meyer checked location information, and this is their phone identifier. So TT3 was Slocumb, TT4 was Warren, TT5 was Cervantes, and TT6 was Gil. And he observed that TT3 and TT5, so that's Slocumb and Cervantes, were moving south along Interstate 5 past Portland. S.A. Meyer also observed that TT4 was in the vicinity of Shelton, so that was Warren, and TT5 was in the vicinity of Gil's residence, TT6. So Gil was near his residence. So that was on November 10th. So you've got Cervantes and Slocumb in November headed down to Arizona. So then TT3 and TT5 are showing that they were continuing to travel south along I-5. And Gil's phone was in the vicinity of the Seattle-Tacoma airport. Investigators believe, based on the location data, that Gil was likely flying to Phoenix, Arizona. Then at approximately 11:45 a.m., agents checked the location information for TT1 and TT6, and they were observed in Phoenix, Arizona. So Gil was in Phoenix. Now, around 4 p.m. on November 10th, he checked TTT and TT5, which were Slocumb and Cervantes, and they were in the vicinity of Los Angeles, California. So, on the 11th, Special Agent Meyer observed that the court authorized 45 days that had allowed them to monitor TT3 and TT4 had expired. So TT3 was Slocumb's. So Slocumb's phone didn't go off the radar. They just could not tap it anymore. Like the trap and trace, the pen trap and trace. It expired. So when Ombre says that, it went off the radar for 6 days, no, it was still out there. It's just the FBI couldn't monitor it. And you notice he'll play these games where he kind of blurs out the documents. You can't read all of it. You can't read the whole thing to know the context behind it. So Meyer continued to monitor location information for TT1 and TT5 and TT6. And he observed that TT5 arrived in the vicinity of Phoenix and moved east with TT1 and TT6 out of Phoenix. So TT5 is Cervantes and TT6 is Gill. So we know that Cervantes, who was with Slocumb, is in Phoenix. So that would also tell us that Slocumb ended up in Phoenix since they had last been observed in Los Angeles, headed towards that way. Okay, and it says in their investigation note that agents believe that Slocumb, even though, they couldn't locate his phone information anymore, believe that he did arrive with Cervantes and met up with Gill on the 11th. Now, it says on November 13th, Special Agent Meyer observed that the location information for TT1, TT5, and TT6 showed the phones back in the vicinity of Phoenix. So, Gill and Cervantes, definitely back in Phoenix. Later that day, location information for TT5 showed the phone traveling west towards California, and TT1 and TT6 were moving east again outside of Phoenix. Based on the training and experience and location information of TT5, agents believe that Slocumb and Cervantes had begun traveling back to Washington with the drugs picked up by Gill. Then on November 14th, S.A. Meyer observed location information from TT5 that showed the phone still moving north along I-5 through California and Oregon, and then finally Washington. At approximately 7:54 p.m., S.A. Meyer observed the phone had moved north through Washington and was in the vicinity of Shelton. Based on his training and experience and location information from TT5, S.A. Meyer believed that Slocumb and Cervantes had immediately driven to Warren's residence in Shelton, Washington, in order to drop off the drugs picked up in Arizona. So did you catch that? Even though they still didn't have the warrant to check on Slocumb's phone, they were still checking Cervantes's, and they believed those two had traveled back up north. So on November 14th, they were not anywhere near Moscow, Idaho. On November 13th, they were not anywhere near Moscow, Idaho. They were clear over, driving up through California and Oregon and up to Shelton. Now, Meyer had checked the location information from the phones and observed that they were all back in Washington, and based on his training and experience and location information from TT1 and TT6, Special Agent Meyer believed that Gill had flown back to Washington from Arizona on November 15th. So, Gill, not near Moscow, Idaho either, on the 13th or 14th. He had flown back from Arizona on the 15th. So then Gill traveled to Ellensburg on November 16th. He traveled from the west side of the state, and he met somebody in Ellensburg, and that turned out to be a burner phone number, the phone number that he called. Now, Pav is trying to claim that that burner phone, that track phone, is Slocumb. But the FBI agents don't believe that's Slocumb. In fact, in these documents, they're saying Slocumb was over in Shelton. They would have said Gill met Slocumb in Ellensburg if after getting everything for the arrest, they had found that. Because this is the thing, even with track phones, these FBI agents aren't stupid. And they have software like Cellbrite. They get a hold of people's phones. They get a hold of the GPS in the vehicles they were driving. They know where they were at. So if Slocumb had been the person that Gill met in Ellensburg, this document would have stated that. Okay? Pav is plain old living in Fantasyland. Okay? If Slocumb had gone anywhere near Moscow, Idaho on the 13th or the 14th of November 2022, they would have known that. Even if the pen and trap and trace for his phone had expired, Once they arrested him and got a hold of his phone, they would have known his movements. They also knew what vehicles they were driving down to Arizona and back. And you could say, well, maybe Slocumb flew from Arizona up to Spokane or to Pullman and went and did the job. They would have known if he had flown. Because that's another thing the FBI does, is they can track when you fly somewhere within the country. So this is all fantasy that Slocumb was there. We know Gill definitely wasn't there. We know Cervantes definitely wasn't there. And agents have every reason to believe after they investigated that Slocumb was with Cervantes. So, weren't anywhere near Moscow. Anne's not going to be bringing these people in as alternative suspects because remember, you have to meet the rules of evidence. And there's no evidence that these guys were anywhere near Moscow, Idaho on the morning of the murders. So, nice try. Maybe you should be a screenwriter for some movies, Pavarotti, because you definitely have quite the imagination. Oh, and one more thing I did want to point out to you, because you also seem to think that Tyson Farley, Kara, Corey, etc., like snitched on Slocumb and all them, like on Jesse James Bailey's game. What's missing in the agencies that helped out with this bust? So from the press release, when they did this major bust, they thanked the investigative teamwork from the DEA, Homeland Security, Washington State Department of Corrections, and significant local assistance from Tacoma Police Department, Pierce County Sheriff's Office, Thurston County Narcotics Task Force, led by Thurston County Sheriff's Office, and the Washington State Patrol, Customs and Border Protection, Aaron Marine, Lewis County Sheriff's Office, Lakewood Police Department, U.S. Postal Inspection Service. In addition to the agencies above, agents and officers from FBI Phoenix, DEA Phoenix Field Division, U.S. Marshal Service, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Puyallup Tribal Police, Vancouver, Pasco, Kennewick, Puyallup, Slocumb, Burien Police Departments, and Clark, Cowlitz, Jefferson, King, and Benton County Sheriff's Offices. Wonder what's missing there. Oh, no agencies from Idaho. Not one. Not the Quad Cities Task Force, not the task force from up in Coeur d'Alene, not the FBI field office out of Salt Lake that handles Idaho. Isn't that interesting? So, if Kara was sitting in jail in Idaho and Corey was on probation in Idaho and Farley had been in out of jail in Idaho, don't you think some agencies in Idaho would have been thanked if any of those people had been involved in helping with the bust? You kept saying that the Quad Cities Task Force is who arrested Farley sitting outside the Dollar Tree, when that still isn't correct. That's not how that went down. But I think, as you like to say, the devil's in the detail. Yeah, no agency from Idaho was even involved in bringing down the Jesse James Bailey gang. So that's a good key, good sign that nobody in Idaho was a snitch. So, anyways, can't wait till trial, because you and all your crazy conspiracies are going to be proven wrong. XOXO, Viviana.